snowstorms. They were military. One of the captain was a former military F-15 pilot. And in a military plane, when you see weather like that, often you have so much excess thrust in your jet engines that you can plow right through things. But the amount of excess thrust to the weight of the airplane that a commercial airliner has is not quite so great. And, you know, he just wasn't as well trained, perhaps, in operating in this kind of a snowstorm as a lot of the older, more experienced pilots. And
this was the plane going out of Washington.
This was the plane going out of Washington, yes, headed for Florida. That hit the 14th Street Bridge and then crashed into the Potomac.
Now, you're suggesting that in instances like this, without being that specific, that perhaps the pressures of competition lead to less satisfactory training, preparation for all kinds of contingencies.
That's only one of several potential problems. Another aspect of that accident was the fact that the airline involved had its de-icing procedures performed by another airline with which it had a contract, because it was a small, fast expanding airline. They couldn't afford to put this kind of a de-icing procedure in all the airports where it went. So this is a common practice throughout the country, particularly as we have an increase in the number of airlines, to contract out some of these maintenance services, some of these de-icing services to other airlines. And an airline ground crew that's maintaining its own planes, the planes of the airline that's paying its salary, is by definition going to be a lot more interested and careful, etc. And the coordination between procedures and training between the two airlines isn't always what it should be.
Dick, would you want to say, or not, say the opposite perhaps, that all in all deregulation with laudable economic objectives has not been that good as far as safety is concerned?
I think it's too early really to draw that sweeping a conclusion, because the safety record is quite remarkable, particularly when you're talking about the regular airlines, and even the commuter airline safety has been much better than a lot of people expected. When we first had deregulation, we were having commuter airlines right and left, and because Langhorne Bond, who was the administrator of the FAA under Jimmy Carter, cracked down pretty heavily on it, it's been remarkable how well the commuter airlines have done. But there's some questionable things out there. I wouldn't make a sweeping conclusion yet.
Well, not on that level. Are you pleased? Are you glad that we have had experienced deregulation?
No, I think deregulation had some very good thinking and ideas behind it as a theory. I think it was carried out in a kind of a knee-jerk, spasmodic, overly hasty way. I don't think you can go from a system of regulation which we'd had for 40 years or more and had built the best aviation system in the country and make this transition overnight. I think it should have been a progression, a carefully phased thing, and I think we have suffered to a certain extent because it was done overnight.
It was strictly economically motivated, wasn't it?
Well, it was the idea that competition, free enterprise, Adam Smith is the best way to get efficient businesses. Certainly the airlines before deregulation had a lot of fat in them. They weren't as efficient as they might have been in terms of low cost in serving various areas. And the Adam Smith theory, and I don't think Adam Smith would have subscribed to it in the case of aviation, was that we're going to have the best possible system by letting the free marketplace forces operate. Well, in my view, that's not completely viable, because the commercial aviation of the system is not just free enterprise like supermarkets or something else. It's a public utility. It's really the lubrication for our economic system. Without it, our economic system and all this high technology we're doing would be in great trouble. It couldn't expand and be as efficient as it is if it weren't for a very efficient aviation system. So you have to make sure that the system works not just for people who want to fly, but for the whole economy. And there are a lot of disruptions, and a lot of small towns were denied service, and this has impact on how goods flow, on where industries locate, and all sorts of things like that. And I don't think you can just overnight make this transition without a lot of economic dislocation.
Of course, Adam Smith didn't have to worry about flying from here to there.
That's true.
Dick, deregulation. In the long run, what do you think the impact will be on prices? the cost to the consumer?
Well, since economists haven't had very clear crystal balls for some time, I might as well look in the crystal ball too and take my chances. The common wisdom to which I largely subscribe is that we'll have a shakeout eventually. We just have too many airlines going to too many places, and we may very well end up in 2, 3, 5 years with a considerable number of either consolidations, mergers, or bankruptcies, and get back to something like the pre-deregulation system, but with a lot more flexibility, which I think we could have had under the regulated system. The regulated system was too hidebound and too inflexible. With proper regulation and forward-looking regulation, we could have done what I think we're going to end up doing, is have a sensibly quasi-deregulated system. But there are going to be a lot fewer airlines. As far as fares are concerned, that will depend to a large extent on the economy. It will depend upon how we get on the fuel prices. Right now, everybody's looking happy because we're finally going to bounce off the bottom of our economic curve, because fuel prices should come down with the glut that we're encountering and the recent decision of OPEC to bring back the prices. And since fuel is 30% of the operating costs, as I said, this is has an enormous impact on the bottom line of airline operations. To the extent to which these fuel economies will be passed along to the customer will depend on how much of a rat race deregulation continues to be in having more and more airlines coming in the market, and that's unpredictable.
Of course, one very important point for me, again, my bias. The last time we spoke together here on The Open Mind, you were talking about some very wonderful airport systems that were still to be put in place, safety devices, means by which monitoring of incoming flights and outgoing flights would take place with much greater ease than it does now. What's happened?
Well, we've made enormous strides, as I said before, in automation.
Right.
And we're getting a whole new, all these computers that we have operating now are late 1960s technology. And we can get along with at least 3,000 fewer controllers than we had before the strike. In rebuilding the system, Lynn Helms, the head of the FAA, is not going to build up to where we were before. There are all kinds of electronic devices that can meter planes into a landing flow and take a plane 1,500 miles away and automatically tell the pilot on the panel how to fly, speeds to fly, and direct him to arrive at a certain point 10 miles outside of Kennedy Airport at a certain altitude at a certain speed, and make that rendezvous within a minute or less.
Okay, but when we spoke last time, I had the feeling that there were technological possibilities, futures, that just weren't being put in place as fast as you thought they could be. Now, is that, maybe I misread what you were saying then. What's the situation now? Do you think we're moving as quickly as we can to install these new devices?
Given the built-in inflexibilities of bureaucracy and the way the government works and the way congressional legislation works, nothing happens ideally, nothing happens along an ideal timetable, but we are putting in an awful lot of, we have a big 10, 20-year program that's going to cost billions of dollars to automate the system, and it's coming along, not as fast as I'd like to see it happen, but it is coming along. For instance, I don't remember exactly what I spoke about the last time I was here, but one of the there have been two enormous advances in the control of air traffic and keeping planes from having near collisions or having collisions, which is the whole purpose of the ball game, that have come along in the last 10, 15 years. And the first of those was being able to tell on a radar scope not only where the 2 or dozen airplanes were over the ground geographically, but what their altitudes were. Tell it right on the radar scope, whereas prior to that, we had to have controllers juggling what's little plastic strips called shrimp boats, and they had to keep writing the new altitude on those things. And well, the human mind got into this, and it's not quite as accurate as a computer. So when we had three-dimensional, that's what it amounts to, three-dimensional radar, you could tell a lot more. It was a lot easier to handle a greater volume of planes in a limited traffic area. The other thing